This video is brought to you by True Tales of Buried Treasure, the largest collection of old treasure magazines in the West. On our website, you can search for individual treasure stories by region, or buy our original magazines themselves. To pay us a visit, please click on the link in the description. Enjoy. For nearly 3 centuries, writers have painted Captain William Kidd as the quintessential storybook pirate. He's often imagined as a swashbuckler with a black patch over one eye, a long-bladed knife clenched between his teeth, and a treasure chest full of pieces of 8 hidden along the East Coast. According to legend, he buried those treasure-filled chests in nearly every bay, inlet, and estuary. But that's the myth of Captain Kidd. The real man was quite different. In truth, Captain Kidd was an honest, hard-working sea captain who, along with his wife, attended church on Manhattan Island. He lived quietly on Liberty Street near the harbor, earning a comfortable living, but he was far from wealthy. Kidd and his wife worshipped at Trinity Church, which still stands today. Unfortunately, he met a pirate's end on the gallows, a fate sealed by a few blackmailers, including William III, King of England. During the colonization of New England, the merchant marine grew significantly as Europe was the hub of manufacturing, and goods had to be shipped across the Atlantic to America. Among the many merchant ships navigating this trade route was one captained by William Kidd. At the time, the great powers of Europe were constantly at odds, with each nation keeping its warships close to home for protection. This left merchant ships vulnerable to pirates, who roamed the seas in swift vessels ready to plunder. Fed up with the threat to England's economy, King William decided it was time to act against the pirates. He summoned Richard Coote, Earl of Bellamont and Governor of New York, instructing him to put an end to the piracy. Bellamont devised a plan. He requested a sturdy ship, well-armed, and a brave captain, with enough funds to not only cover the mission's costs, but also to turn a profit. The king, though initially shocked by the audacity of the plan, eventually agreed to provide a ship for privateering against the French. If Bellamont could find a financial backer, the king hinted he might accept a share of the spoils. Back in New York, Bellamont approached his friend Colonel Robert Livingston, a successful businessman who agreed to finance the venture. With the partnership formed, they needed only a captain. Livingston suggested William Kidd, a courageous seaman with a reputation for honesty. Though Livingston doubted Kidd would join such a scheme, Bellamont, confident in his powers of persuasion, insisted on meeting him. One evening, as Kidd was working on charts and manifests at his desk, a knock came at the door. Before he could respond, his wife hurried in to announce that Governor Bellamont was calling. She recognized him from Trinity Church services. Kidd quickly rose to greet the governor, who, after a brief introduction, requested a private conversation. Mrs. Kidd was dismissed, and Bellamont began to outline his plan, leaving Kidd to consider his proposition. Kidd was flattered by the governor's offer, but certain aspects of the plan didn't sit well with him. Surely, among all the sea captains in New York, the governor could find another who would jump at the chance to serve the crown. But Kidd wasn't that man. As Bellamont flipped through the manifest on Kidd's desk, he insisted, "No one is as qualified as you, Captain. You're the right man for the job, and if you don't accept, you'll make no more voyages, and you'll no longer be a sea captain." With that, the governor closed the manifest and added, "I'll expect you at my residence tomorrow morning for a briefing." What doubts or inner conflicts Kidd wrestled with that night remain unknown. Perhaps the notion of legal privateering helped him justify his decision, because the next morning, he accepted Bellamont's proposal at the governor's mansion. Kidd was given instructions and booked passage aboard a merchant vessel bound for England. After reading a letter of introduction from Bellamont, King William issued Kidd 2 commissions, one to rid the seas of pirates and the other to privateer against the French. Armed with these orders, Kidd set out to find his ship. Walking along the quay, Kidd searched among the moored vessels until he found one bearing the name Adventure Galley. Climbing aboard, he discovered the ship was in disrepair and lacked a crew. Undeterred, he began recruiting sailors, but to his disappointment, few qualified men were available. He had to settle for seamen who were scarcely better than pirates themselves. After weeks of preparation, the adventure galley finally caught a strong breeze and sailed out to sea. Kidd ordered more sail and instructed his first mate to set a course for Madagascar, a notorious pirate stronghold. With 30 guns and 80 men, the adventure galley sailed confidently over the horizon. The year was 1669. However, Madagascar turned out to be a fruitless hunting ground. The pirates, somehow tipped off about Kidd's mission, had vanished before he arrived. Not a single ship was captured. As months dragged on, a third of the crew succumbed to cholera, provisions ran dangerously low, and the ship began leaking badly. Whispers of mutiny spread among the crew as the situation grew increasingly dire. One day, William Moore, the leader of the would-be mutineers, confronted Kidd on the open deck. Unarmed, Kidd grabbed a heavy bucket and struck Moore, killing him instantly. The mutiny was over before it began. Kidd warned the crew that while he would overlook this incident due to their harsh conditions, he would not hesitate to crack more heads if anyone else had similar ideas. The next morning, the ship lay becalmed under a scorching sun. Kidd, pacing the deck, encountered several crew members standing outside his cabin. One of them, drenched in sweat, stepped forward and pleaded, "Captain, if we don't act soon, we're all going to die of sickness or starvation, and you will too." Kidd replied, "What can I do? We haven't seen a single pirate ship. Someone must have warned them." "We've seen other ships," the sailor responded. Kidd stared at him, understanding the implication. "Are you asking me to hoist the skull and crossbones? Me, an agent of the king, turned pirate? Sir, we need sustenance to survive, no matter how we get it." Kidd scanned the faces of his crew, searching for any remaining loyalty, but all he saw was desperation. He realized he was alone. Refusing their request would mean certain death. Reluctantly, he agreed. "All right, we'll take the next ship, but remember, this is not my doing." Soon after, a richly laden ship belonging to the Great Mogul of East India appeared on the horizon. The adventure galley gave chase and easily overtook the vessel, named the Quetta Merchant. The ship fell quickly to the slashing swords of Kidd's men. When the spoils were counted, the Quetta Merchant yielded $150,000 in gold, silver, and jewels. But Kidd's greatest stroke of luck came from the ship's papers, which revealed that the Quetta Merchant was sailing under French passes. This made her a legitimate target for the English, turning Kidd from pirate to privateer in the eyes of the law. The next day, Kidd transferred everything to the more seaworthy Quetta Merchant and scuttled the adventure galley. Days passed before they spotted another ship. Using his spyglass, Kidd remarked, "She's East Indian like this one. Let's see if she has any French passes." With all sails crowded on, the Quetta Merchant slowly closed the distance between herself and the unsuspecting vessel. When within gun range, Kidd ordered a cannon shot across the ship's bow. He could now make out her name, Maiden. One shot was all it took. The Maiden hove to, her captain furious as he confronted Kidd. "Do you realize this ship belongs to the Great Mogul of East India?" he demanded. "You'll swing for this act of piracy." Kidd remained silent until a smiling officer handed him some documents. "How is it," Kidd asked, "that your ship is sailing under a French pass? We are privateers for England, doing our duty for the crown." After transferring the Maiden's cargo to the Quetta Merchant, Kidd sank the captured ship and set the prisoners ashore on an island. Then he set sail for the West Indies. The year was 1699. Kidd anchored in Snake Island Harbor and took a work party with him to visit an old friend, Henry Bolton, who ran a general store. Bolton was shocked to see him. "What's wrong, Henry?" Kidd asked. "We've had a bit of good luck and need some supplies for the trip back to New York." "Is it good luck to be branded a pirate with a price on your head?" Bolton replied. Kidd was stunned. "By whose orders?" "Governor Bellamont and King William," Bolton answered. Kidd was aghast. He learned that the Great Mogul had signed a profitable trade agreement with England, and the capture and looting of 2 of his ships threatened to sever the alliance. To keep the lucrative trade contract intact, the king had branded Kidd a pirate and promised to hang him as soon as he was captured. Kidd was bewildered. He had been commissioned by the King of England to privateer against the French, and both the Quetta Merchant and Maiden carried French passes. Moreover, he had formed a partnership with Bellamont and Colonel Livingston. He couldn't wait to get back to New York to clear his name. However, events unfolded that remain mysterious to this day. Instead of using his captured ship, Kidd purchased a sloop, the San Antonio, and transferred most of his treasure to it. He then convoyed the Quetta merchant to a cove near San Domingo. The fate of the Quetta merchant has never been fully resolved, though there is much speculation. Kidd next appeared in Lewis, Delaware, where he stopped for water and supplies. Then he anchored off Gardiner's Island in Long Island Sound. What follows is recorded history, unembellished by folklore. It is the only verified account of treasure hidden by Kidd. John Gardiner, the owner of Gardiner's Island, waited a day for a landing party from the sloop San Antonio. When none arrived, he rowed out to inquire about its presence. Gardiner met Kidd, who was surprisingly personable. Gardiner invited Kidd to dinner on the island, and Kidd accepted. Afterward, Kidd thanked Gardiner and his wife, returned to his sloop, and sailed away. 3 days later, Kidd returned and came ashore with gifts for Gardiner, his wife, and their son. He also brought a heavy chest and asked if he could bury it on the island for a short time. Gardiner agreed, and the chest was buried in a spot later known as Kidd's Hollow. As they patted down the earth, Kidd pointed to a sloop anchored nearby and warned, "That sloop belongs to Captain Cornelius Quick, a man of short temper and ill repute. Tell no one about this chest or I won't be responsible for Captain Quick's actions." Gardiner assured him he would keep the secret. Kidd thanked him again for his hospitality and set sail. Before leaving, however, Gardiner observed Kidd transferring 2 additional chests to Quick's ship. Once Kidd arrived in New York, he was informed that Bellamont would meet him in Boston to resolve the misunderstanding. However, when Kidd reached Boston, the governor promptly had him arrested and thrown into jail. Kidd was then sent to England to stand trial, with the promise that Bellamont would personally deliver the French passes that Kidd had turned over to him. But Kidd remained imprisoned for over a year before his case was heard. He pleaded for more time, as witnesses for the crown sealed his fate. On the final day, just before the verdict was announced, Kidd made a passionate appeal for an extension, only to be interrupted by the chief magistrate. "We have received word from the colonies that the Earl of Bellamont is dead," Kidd was informed. "There is no reason to prolong this trial. You have been judged fairly and found guilty of piracy. It is the Crown's decision that you be taken to the proper place of execution and hanged by the neck until dead." Kidd struggled to maintain his composure. "My lords," he said, "it is a very hard sentence. For my part, I am the most innocent person of them all. I have been sworn against by perjured persons." On May 23, 1701, Captain William Kidd was hanged at Wapping Old Stairs in England. The rope snapped on the first attempt, but it held on the second. His body was then cut down, soaked in tar as a preservative, and hung back up in chains where it swayed for years as a warning to those who would go a-pirating. 2 centuries later, while researching in the London Office of Public Records, a writer named Ralph D. Payne discovered the French passes that would have saved Kidd's life. Controversy has long surrounded the search for Kidd's treasure. Some argue that he never had any to bury, yet historical records show that his was the only known pirate treasure ever to be recovered. Shortly after Kidd's arrest, Gardiner contacted Bellamont, who instructed him to dig up the chest Kidd had hidden on Gardiner's Island. The official inventory revealed the chest contained 1,111 ounces of gold, 2,353 ounces of silver, and rubies large and small. But what became of the rest of the loot taken from the Quetta merchant and maiden? Kidd was no fool, so why the spectacle of burying treasure in Gardiner's presence? He surely knew Gardiner would report it to the authorities, despite any threats. It is my belief that this chest was a decoy. Kidd likely planned to sacrifice a small portion of the treasure, hoping Bellamont would assume it was all of it, allowing Kidd to keep the larger portion for himself. Kidd also told Gardiner that he was going to Block Island and would return shortly. However, he didn't come back for 3 days. The distance between the islands is only 20 miles. What was Kidd doing all that time? Was he even at Block Island? Kidd was escorted to Gardiner's Island by Captain Quick. A week after Kidd's arrest, Gardiner made a statement to the authorities. Quick remained with his sloop there from noon to the evening of the same day, and took on board 2 chests that came out of Kidd's sloop, under the observance of this narrator. Gardner also noted that the next day, after Quick sailed from Gardner's Island, he saw Quick's sloop turning out of Oyster Pan Bay, despite favorable winds to carry him up the Sound. The narrator supposes he went in thither to land some goods. Could these goods have been the 2 chests Kidd gave him? While awaiting trial, Kidd wrote to Bellamont, suggesting he be sent to San Domingo, where he could bring off 50 or 60 pounds, which would otherwise be lost. Bellamont refused the offer, and Kidd raised it to 100,000 pounds, but to no avail. Kidd also contacted Colonel Livingston, one of his partners, offering him a 40-pound weight of gold hidden and secured somewhere between Boston and New York, which nobody could find save he, if the colonel would intercede on his behalf. Livingston naturally declined. To help Kidd would have meant admitting to the partnership between himself, the imprisoned sea captain, the king, and Bellamont. He wasn't about to put his own neck in a noose. While imprisoned in Boston, Kidd managed to smuggle out a letter to his wife. In it, he described a way for her to recover the treasure, but the instructions were in code, with the numbers 44106818. Whether Mrs. Kidd had the key to the code or worked it out is unknown, but it's unlikely that Kidd intended to mystify his wife, so they must have had some understanding. It is generally believed that she did not pursue the quest, fearing Bellamont's wrath. Years later, Edgar Allan Poe came across these numbers and attempted to decipher them. He devoted an entire book to a plot revolving around these tantalizing digits, titled The Gold Bug. After working out the first 4 numbers, Poe mysteriously stopped, leaving readers intrigued and baffled. Captain Kidd left behind a legend unmatched by any other pirate. Even the final disposition of his body remains a mystery. Some historians believe it was brought back to America and buried in New York. The renowned Astor family is rumored to have gained its wealth by digging up Kidd's treasure on Deer Island off Maine in 1801. Perhaps. Many locations have been suggested for Kidd's plunder, and many searchers have dug in vain. I still believe the best lead is to unravel those numbers 44106818. If you succeed, you may well find the legendary pirate's booty. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to read the original article or purchase the magazine from which it was taken, please check out our website, truetalesofburiedtreasure.com.